Mysteries await just a page away. Ready to dive in? Welcome to The Book Reader, where stories unfold one enchanting page at a time. Subscribe now and unlock the magic.
The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, Stieg Larsson.
Chapter 7. Monday, April 11th to Tuesday, April 12th. At 5:45 p.m. On Monday, Blomkvist closed the lid on his iBook and got up from the kitchen table in his apartment on Bellmansgaten. He put on a jacket and walked to Milton Security's offices in Slussen. He took the elevator up to the reception on the 4th floor and was immediately shown into a conference room. It was 6 o'clock p.m. on the dot, but he was the last to arrive. "Hello, Dragan," he said and shook hands. "Thank you for being willing to host this informal meeting." Blomkvist looked around the room. There were 4 others there. His sister, Salander's former guardian Holger Palmgren, Malin Eriksson, and former criminal inspector Sonny Bowman, who now worked for Milton Security. At Armansky's instruction, Bowman had been following the Salander investigation from the start. Palmgren was on his first outing in more than 2 years. Dr. Sivernanden of the Ersta Rehabilitation Home had been less than enchanted at the idea of letting him out, but Palmgren himself had insisted. He had come by special transport for the disabled, accompanied by his personal assistant and trainer, Johanna Carolina Oskarsson, whose salary was paid from a fund that had been mysteriously established to provide Palmgren with the best possible care. Oskarsson was sitting in an office next to the conference room. She had brought a book with her. Blomkvist closed the door behind him. For those of you who haven't met her before, this is Malin Eriksson, Millennium's editor-in-chief. I asked her to be here because what we're going to discuss will also affect her job. "Okay," Armansky said. "Everyone's here. I'm all ears." Blomkvist stood at Armansky's whiteboard and picked up a marker. He looked around. "This is probably the craziest thing I've ever been involved with," he said. "When this is all over, I'm going to found an association called the Knights of the Idiotic Table, and its purpose will be to arrange an annual dinner where we tell stories about Lisbeth Salander. You're all members." He paused. "So, this is how things really are," he said, and he began to make a list of headings on Armansky's whiteboard. He talked for a good 30 minutes. Afterwards, the discussion went on for almost 3 hours. Goldberg sat down next to Clinton when their meeting was over. They spoke in low voices for a few minutes before Goldberg stood up. The old comrades shook hands. Goldberg took a taxi to Frey's, packed his briefcase, and checked out. He took the late afternoon train to Göteborg. He chose first class and had the compartment to himself. When he passed Arstebron, he took out a ballpoint pen and a notepad. He thought for a long while and then began to write. He filled half a page before he stopped and tore the sheet off the pad. Forged documents had never been his department or his expertise, but here the task was simplified by the fact that the letters he was writing would be signed by him. What complicated the issue was that not a word of what he was writing was true. By the time the train went through Nyköping, he had already discarded a number of drafts, but he was starting to get a sense for how the letters should be phrased. When they arrived in Göteborg, he had 12 letters he was satisfied with. He made sure he had left clear fingerprints on each sheet. At Göteborg Central Station, he tracked down a photocopier and made copies of the letters. Then he bought envelopes and stamps and posted the letters in a box with a 9 o'clock p.m. collection. Goldberg took a taxi to City Hotel on Lorensbergsgatan, where Clinton had already booked a room for him. It was the same hotel Blomkvist had spent the night in several days before. He went straight to his room and sat on the bed. He was completely exhausted and realized that he had eaten only 2 slices of bread all day. Yet he was not hungry. He undressed, stretched out in bed, and fell asleep almost at once. Salander woke with a start when she heard the door open. She knew right away that it was not one of the night nurses. She opened her eyes to 2 narrow slits and saw a silhouette with crutches in the doorway. Zalachenko was watching her in the light that came from the corridor. Without moving her head, she glanced at the digital clock. 3:10 a.m. She then glanced at the bedside table and saw the water glass. She calculated the distance. She could just reach it without having to move her body. It would take a few seconds to stretch out her arm and break off the rim of the glass with a firm rap against the hard edge of the table. It would take half a second to shove the broken edge into Zalachenko's throat if he leaned over her. She looked for other options, but the glass was her only reachable weapon. She relaxed and waited. Zalachenko stood in the doorway for 2 minutes without moving. Then gingerly he closed the door. She heard the faint scraping of the crutches as he quietly retreated down the corridor. 5 minutes later she propped herself up on her right elbow, reached for the glass, and took a long drink of water. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed. With effort she stood up, pulled the electrodes off her arms and chest, and swayed unsteadily. It took her a few seconds to gain control over her body. She hobbled to the door and leaned against the wall to catch her breath. She was in a cold sweat. Then she turned icy with rage. "Fuck you, Zalachenko. Let's end this right here and now." She needed a weapon. The next moment she heard quick heels clacking in the corridor. "Shit. The electrodes. What in God's name are you doing up?" the night nurse said. "I had to go to the toilet," Salander said breathlessly. "Get back into bed at once." She took Salander's hand and helped her into the bed. Then she got a bedpan. "When you have to go to the toilet, just ring for us. That's what this button is for." Blomqvist woke up at 10:30 on Tuesday, showered, put on coffee, and then sat down with his iBook. After the meeting at Milton Security the previous evening, he had come home and worked until 5 o'clock a.m. The story was finally beginning to take shape. Zalachenko's biography was still vague. All he had was what he had blackmailed Bjork to reveal, as well as the handful of details Palmgren had been able to provide. Salander's story was pretty much done. He explained step by step how she had been targeted by a gang of Cold War mongers at SIS and locked away in a psychiatric hospital to stop her from blowing the whistle on Zalachenko. He was pleased with what he had written. There were still some holes that he would have to fill, but he knew that he had one hell of a story. It would be a news sensation, and there would be volcanic eruptions high up in the government bureaucracy. He smoked a cigarette while he thought. He could see two particular gaps that needed attention. One was manageable. He had to deal with Teleborian, and he was looking forward to that assignment. When he was finished with him, the renowned children's psychiatrist would be one of the most detested men in Sweden. That was one thing. The second thing was more complicated. The men who conspired against Salander, he thought of them as the Zalachenko Club, were inside the security police. He knew one, Gunnar Bjork, but Bjork could not possibly be the only man responsible. There had to be a group, a division or unit of some sort. There must be chiefs, operations managers. There had to be a budget. But he had no idea how to go about identifying these people, where even to start. He had only the vaguest notion of how Sapo was organized. On Monday he had begun his research by sending Cortez to the second-hand bookshops on Södermalm, to buy every book which in any way dealt with the security police. Cortez had come to his apartment in the afternoon with 6 books. Espionage in Sweden by Michael Rosquist, Tempus, 1988. Sapo Chief 1962-1970 by P. G. Vinge, Wallström and Widstrand, 1988. Secret Forces by Jan Ottosson and Lars Magnusson, Tiden, 1991. Power Struggle for Sapo by Eric Magnusson, Corona, 1989. An Assignment by Carl Lidbom, Wallström and Widstrand, 1990. And, somewhat surprisingly, An Agent in Place by Thomas Whiteside, Viking, 1966, which dealt with the Wennerström affair. The Wennerström affair of the 60s, not Blomqvist's own much more recent Wennerström affair. He had spent much of Monday night and the early hours of Tuesday morning reading or at least skimming the books. When he had finished, he made some observations. First, most of the books published about the security police were from the late 80s. An internet search showed that there was hardly any current literature on the subject. Second, there did not seem to be any intelligible basic overview of the activities of the Swedish secret police over the years. This may have been because many documents were stamped top secret and were therefore off limits, but there did not seem to be any single institution, researcher, or media that had carried out a critical examination of Säpo. He also noticed another odd thing. There was no bibliography in any of the books Cortez had found. On the other hand, the footnotes often referred to articles in the evening newspapers, or to interviews with some old, retired Säpo hand. The book Secret Forces was fascinating but largely dealt with the time before and during the Second World War. Blomqvist regarded P.G. Vinge's memoir as propaganda, written in self-defense by a severely criticized Säpo chief who was eventually fired. An agent in place contained so much inaccurate information about Sweden in the first chapter that he threw the book into the wastepaper basket. The only two books with any real ambition to portray the work of the security police were Power Struggle for Säpo and Espionage in Sweden. They contained data, names, and organizational charts. He found Magnusson's book to be especially worthwhile reading. Even though it did not offer any answers to his immediate questions, it provided a good account of Säpo as a structure, as well as of its primary concerns over several decades. The biggest surprise was Lidbom's An Assignment, which described the problems encountered by the former Swedish ambassador to France when he was commissioned to examine Säpo in the wake of the Palme assassination and the Ebba Carlsson affair. Blomqvist had never before read anything by Lidbom, and he was taken aback by the sarcastic tone combined with razor-sharp observations. But even Lidbom's book brought Blomqvist no closer to an answer to his questions, even if he was beginning to get an idea of what he was up against. He opened his mobile and called Cortez. "Hi, Henry. Thanks for the legwork yesterday. What do you need now?" "A little more legwork. Mick, I hate to say this, but I have a job to do. I'm managing editor now. An excellent career advancement. What is it that you want?" Over the years there have been a number of public reports on Säpo. Carl Lidbom did one. There must be several others like it. I see. Order everything you can find from Parliament. Budgets, public reports, interpellations, and the like. And get Säpo's annual reports as far back as you can find them. Yes, master. Good man. And, Henry? Yes? I don't need them until tomorrow. Salander spent the whole day brooding about Zalachenko. She knew that he was only 2 doors away, that he wandered in the corridors at night, and that he had come to her room at 3:10 that morning. She had tracked him to Gosseberga fully intending to kill him. She had failed, with the result that Zalachenko was alive and tucked into bed just 30 feet from where she was. And she was in hot water. She could not tell how bad the situation was, but she supposed that she would have to escape and discreetly disappear abroad herself if she did not want to risk being locked up in some nuthouse again with Teleborian as her keeper. The problem was that she could scarcely sit upright in bed. She did notice improvements. The headache was still there, but it came in waves instead of being constant. The pain in her left shoulder had subsided a bit, but it resurfaced whenever she tried to move. She heard footsteps outside the door and saw a nurse open it to admit a woman wearing black pants, a white blouse, and a dark jacket. She was pretty, slender, with dark hair in a boyish hairstyle. She radiated a cheerful confidence. She was carrying a black briefcase. Salander saw at once that she had the same eyes as Blomqvist. "Hello, Lisbeth. I'm Annika Giannini," she said. "May I come in?" Salander studied her without expression. All of a sudden she did not have the slightest desire to meet Blomqvist's sister and regretted that she had accepted this woman as her lawyer. Giannini came in, shut the door behind her, and pulled up a chair. She sat there for some time, looking at her client. The girl looked terrible. Her head was wrapped in bandages. She had purple bruises around her bloodshot eyes. "Before we begin to discuss anything, I have to know whether you really do want me to be your lawyer." Normally I'm involved in civil cases, in which I represent victims of rape or domestic violence. I'm not a criminal defense lawyer. I have, however, studied the details of your case, and I would very much like to represent you, if I may. I should also tell you that Michael Blomkvist is my brother. I think you already know that, and that he and Dragan Armansky are paying my fee. She paused, but when she got no response she continued. If you want me to be your lawyer, it's you I will be working for. Not for my brother or for Armansky. I have to tell you too that I will receive advice and support during any trial from your former guardian, Holger Palmgren. He's tough, and he dragged himself out of his sickbed to help you. Palmgren? Yes. Have you seen him? Yes. How's he doing? He's absolutely furious, but strangely he doesn't seem to be at all worried about you. Salander smiled lopsidedly. It was the first time she had smiled at Sahlgrenska Hospital. How are you feeling? Like a sack of shit. Well then. Do you want me to be your lawyer? Yes. But I'll pay your fee myself. I don't want a single oar from Armansky or Kalle Blomkvist. But I can't pay before I have access to the internet. I understand. We'll deal with that problem when it arises. In any case, the state will be paying most of my salary. I'll get started by giving you a message from Michael. It sounds a little cryptic, but he says you'll know what he means. Oh? He wants you to know that he's told me most of the story, except for a few details, of which the first concerns the skills he discovered in Hedestad. He knows that I have a photographic memory, and that I'm a hacker. He's kept quiet about that. Okay. The other is the DVD. I don't know what he's referring to, but he was adamant that it's up to you to decide whether you tell me about it or not. Do you know what he's referring to? The film of Björman raping me. Yes. That's good, then. Janini was suddenly hesitant. I'm a little miffed at my brother. Even though he hired me, he'll only tell me what he feels like telling me. Do you intend to hide things from me too? I don't know. Could we leave that question for later? Salander said. Certainly. We're going to be talking to each other quite a lot. I don't have time for a long conversation now. I have to meet Prosecutor Jervis in 45 minutes. I just wanted to confirm that you really do want me to be your lawyer. But there's something else I need to tell you. Yes? It's this. If I'm not present, you're not to say a single word to the police, no matter what they ask you. Even if they provoke you or accuse you. Can you promise me? No problem. Goldberg was completely exhausted after all his efforts on Monday. He did not wake until 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning, 4 hours later than usual. He went to the bathroom to shower and brush his teeth. He stood for a long time looking at his face in the mirror before he turned off the light and went to get dressed. He chose the only clean shirt he had left in the brown briefcase and put on a brown patterned tie. He went down to the hotel's breakfast room and had a cup of black coffee and a slice of wheat toast with cheese and a little marmalade on it. He drank a glass of mineral water. Then he went to the hotel lobby and called Clinton's mobile from the public telephone. It's me. Status report? A lot of BS. Frederick, can you handle this? Yes. It's like the old days. But it's a shame von Rottinger isn't still with us. He was better at planning operations than I. You were equally good. You could have switched places at any time. Which you quite often did. It's a matter of intuition. He was always a little sharper. Tell me, how are you all doing? Sandberg is brighter than we thought. We brought in some external help in the form of Martinson. He's a gopher, but he's usable. We have taps on Blomkvist's landline and mobile. We'll take care of Giannini's and the Millennium office phones today. We're looking at the blueprints for all the relevant offices and apartments. We'll be going in as soon as it can be done. First thing is to locate all the copies. I've already done that. We've had some unbelievable luck. Giannini called Blomkvist this morning. She actually asked him how many copies there were in circulation, and it turned out that Blomkvist only has one. Berger copied the report, but she sent the copy on to Bublansky. Good. No time to waste. I know. But it has to be done in one fell swoop. If we don't get all the copies simultaneously, it won't work. True. It's a bit complicated, since Giannini left for Gothenburg this morning. I've sent a team of externals to tail her. They're flying down right now. Good. Goldberg could not think of anything more to say. Thanks, Frederick, he said at last. My pleasure. This is a lot more fun than sitting around waiting for a kidney. They said goodbye. Goldberg paid his hotel bill and went out to the street. The ball was in motion. Now it was just a matter of mapping out the moves. He started by walking to the elite Park Avenue Hotel, where he asked to use the fax machine. He didn't want to do it at the hotel where he had been staying. He faxed copies of the letters he had written the day before. Then he went out onto Avenue to look for a taxi. He stopped at a trash can and tore up the copies of his letters. Giannini was with Prosecutor Jervis for 15 minutes. She wanted to know what charges the prosecutor intended to bring against Salander, but she soon realized that Jervis was not yet sure of her plan. Right now I'll settle for charges of aggravated assault and attempted murder. I refer to the fact that Salander hit her father with an axe. I take it that you will plead self-defense? Maybe. To be honest with you, Niederman is my priority at the moment. I understand. I've been in touch with the Prosecutor General. Discussions are ongoing as to whether to combine all the charges against your client under the jurisdiction of a prosecutor in Stockholm and tie them in with what happened here. I assumed that the case would be handled in Stockholm, Giannini said. Fine. But I need an opportunity to question the girl. When can we do that? I have a report from her doctor, Anders Jonasson. He says that Salander won't be in a condition to participate in an interview for several days yet. Apart from her injuries, she's on powerful painkillers. I received a similar report, and as you no doubt realize, this is frustrating. I repeat that my priority is Niederman. Your client says that she doesn't know where he's hiding. She doesn't know Niederman at all. She happened to identify him and track him down to Gosseberga, to Zalachenko's farm. We'll meet again as soon as your client is strong enough to be interviewed, Jervis said. Goldberg had a bunch of flowers in his hand when he got into the elevator at Sahlgrenska Hospital at the same time as a short-haired woman in a dark jacket. He held the elevator door open for her and let her go first to the reception desk on the ward. My name is Annika Giannini. I'm a lawyer and I'd like to see my client again. Lisbeth Salander. Goldberg turned his head very slowly and looked in surprise at the woman. He glanced down at her briefcase as the nurse checked Giannini's ID and consulted a list. Room 12, the nurse said. Thank you. I know the way. She walked off down the corridor. May I help you? Thank you, yes. I'd like to leave these flowers for Carl Axel Boden. He's not allowed visitors. I know. I just want to leave the flowers. We'll take care of them. Goldberg had brought the flowers with him mainly as an excuse. He wanted to get an idea of how the ward was laid out. He thanked the nurse and followed the sign to the staircase. On the way, he passed Zalachenko's door, room 14 according to Jonas Sandberg. He waited in the stairwell. Through a glass pane in the door he saw the nurse take the bouquet into Zalachenko's room. When she returned to her station, Goldberg pushed open the door to room 14 and stepped quickly inside. Good morning, Alexander, he said. Zalachenko looked up in surprise at his unannounced visitor. I thought you'd be dead by now, he said. Not quite yet. What do you want? What do you think? Goldberg pulled up a chair and sat down. Probably to see me dead. Well, that's gratitude for you. How could you be so fucking stupid? We give you a whole new life and you wind up here. If Zalachenko could have laughed he would have. In his opinion, the Swedish security police were amateurs. That applied to Goldberg and equally to Björk. Not to mention that complete idiot Björman. Once again, we have to haul you out of the furnace." The expression did not sit well with Zalachenko, who thought back to his gasoline bomb attack. "Spare me the lectures. Just get me out of this mess. That's what I wanted to discuss with you." Goldberg put his briefcase on his lap, took out a notebook, and turned to a blank page. Then he gave Zalachenko a long, searching look. "There's one thing I'm curious about. Were you really going to betray us after all we've done for you?" "What do you think?" "It depends how crazy you are." "Don't call me crazy. I'm a survivor. I do what I have to do to survive." Goldberg shook his head. "No, Alexander, you do what you do because you're evil and rotten. You wanted a message from the section. I'm here to deliver it. We're not going to lift a finger to help you this time." All of a sudden Zalachenko looked uncertain. He studied Goldberg, trying to figure out if this was some puzzling bluff. "You don't have a choice," he said. "There's always a choice," Goldberg said. "I'm going to." "You're not going to do anything at all." Goldberg took a deep breath, unzipped the outside pocket of his case, and pulled out a 9mm Smith & Wesson with a gold-plated butt. The revolver was a present he had received from British intelligence 25 years earlier as a reward for an invaluable piece of information. The name of a clerical officer at MI5 who in good Philby style was working for the Russians. Zalachenko looked astonished. Then he burst out laughing. "And what are you going to do with that? Shoot me? You'll spend the rest of your miserable life in prison." "I don't think so." Zalachenko was suddenly very unsure whether Goldberg was bluffing. "There will be a scandal of enormous proportions." "Again, I don't think so. There'll be a few headlines, but in a week nobody will even remember the name Zalachenko." Zalachenko's eyes narrowed. "You motherfucker," Goldberg said then with such coldness in his voice that Zalachenko froze. Goldberg squeezed the trigger and put the bullet right in the center of Zalachenko's forehead just as the patient was starting to swing his prosthesis over the edge of the bed. Zalachenko was thrown back onto the pillow. His good leg kicked 4-5 times before he was still. Goldberg saw a red flower-shaped splatter on the wall behind the bed. He became aware that his ears were ringing after the shot and he rubbed his left one with his free hand. Then he stood up, put the muzzle to Zalachenko's temple, and squeezed the trigger twice. He wanted to be sure this time that the bastard really was dead. Salander sat up with a start the instant she heard the first shot. Pain stabbed through her shoulder. When the next two shots came, she tried to get her legs over the edge of the bed. Giannini had been there for only a few minutes. She sat paralyzed and tried to work out which direction the sharp reports had come from. She could tell from Salander's reaction that something deadly was brewing. "Lie still," she shouted. She put her hand on Salander's chest and shoved her client down onto the bed. Then Giannini crossed the room and pulled open the door. She saw two nurses running towards another room 2 doors away. The first nurse stopped short on the threshold. "No, don't," she screamed and then took a step back, colliding with the second nurse. "He's got a gun. Run." Giannini watched as the two nurses took cover in the room next to Salander's. The next moment she saw a thin, gray-haired man in a houndstooth jacket walk into the corridor. He had a gun in his hand. Annika recognized him as the man who had come up in the elevator with her. Then their eyes met. He appeared confused. He aimed the revolver at her and took a step forward. She pulled her head back in and slammed the door shut, looking around in desperation. A nurse's table stood right next to her. She rolled it quickly over to the door and wedged the tabletop under the door handle. She heard a movement and turned to see Salander just starting to clamber out of bed again. In a few quick steps she crossed the floor, wrapped her arms around her client, and lifted her up. She tore electrodes and IV tubes loose as she carried her to the bathroom and set her on the toilet seat. Then she turned and locked the bathroom door. She dug her mobile out of her jacket pocket and dialed 112. Goldberg went to Salander's room and tried the door handle. It was blocked. He couldn't move it even an inch. For a moment he stood indecisively outside the door. He knew that the lawyer, Giannini, was in the room, and he wondered if a copy of Bjork's report might be in her briefcase. But he couldn't get into the room, and he did not have the strength to force the door. That hadn't been part of the plan anyway. Clinton would take care of Giannini. Goldberg's only job was Zalachenko. He looked around the corridor and saw that he was being watched by nurses, patients, and visitors. He raised the pistol and fired at a picture hanging on the wall. His spectators vanished as if by magic. He glanced one last time at the door to Salander's room. Then he walked decisively back to Zalachenko's room and closed the door. He sat in the guest chair and looked at the Russian defector who had been such an intimate part of his own life for so many years. He sat still for almost 10 minutes before he heard movement in the corridor and was aware that the police had arrived. By now he wasn't thinking of anything in particular. Then he raised the revolver one last time, held it to his temple, and squeezed the trigger. As the situation developed, the futility of attempting suicide in the middle of a hospital became apparent. Goldberg was transported at top speed to the hospital's trauma unit, where Drive. Jonasson received him and immediately initiated a battery of measures to maintain his vital functions. For the second time in less than a week, Jonasson performed emergency surgery, extracting a full metal-jacketed bullet from human brain tissue. After a 5-hour operation, Goldberg's condition was critical. But he was still alive. Yet Goldberg's injuries were considerably more serious than those Salander had sustained. He hovered between life and death for several days. Blomkvist was at the Caf Bar on Hornsgaden when he heard on the radio that a 65-year-old unnamed man, suspected of attempting to murder the fugitive Lisbeth Salander, had been shot and killed at Sahlgrenska Hospital in Göteborg. He left his coffee untouched, picked up his laptop case, and hurried off towards the editorial offices on Götgaden. He had crossed Mariatorget and was just turning up Street Paulsgaden when his mobile beeped. He answered on the run. Blomkvist. Hi, it's Malin. I heard the news. Do we know who the killer was? Not yet. Henry is chasing it down. I'm on the way in. Be there in 5 minutes. Blomkvist ran into Cortez at the entrance to the Millennium offices. Ekstrom's holding a press conference at 3 o'clock, Cortez said. I'm going to Kingsholmen now. What do we know? Blomkvist shouted after him. Ask Malin, Cortez said, and was gone. Blomkvist headed into Berger's, wrong. Eriksson's, office. She was on the phone and writing furiously on a yellow post-it. She waved him away. Blomkvist went into the kitchenette and poured coffee with milk into 2 mugs marked with the logos of the KDU and SSU political parties. When he returned, she had just finished her call. He gave her the SSU mug. Okay, she said. Zalachenko was shot dead at 1:15. She looked at Blomkvist. I just spoke to a nurse at Sahlgrenska. She says that the murderer was an elderly man who arrived with flowers for Zalachenko minutes before the murder. He shot Zalachenko in the head several times and then shot himself. Zalachenko is dead. The murderer is still alive and in surgery. Blomkvist breathed more easily. Ever since he had heard the news at the Caf Bar, he had had his heart in his throat and a panicky feeling that Salander might have been the killer. That really would have thrown a monkey wrench into his plan. Do we have the name of the shooter? Eriksson shook her head as the phone rang again. She took the call, and from the conversation Blomkvist gathered that it was a stringer in Göteborg whom Eriksson had sent to Sahlgrenska. He went to his own office and sat down. It felt as if it was the first time in weeks that he had even been to his office. There was a pile of unopened mail, which he shoved firmly to one side. He called his sister. Giannini. It's Michael. Did you hear what happened at Sahlgrenska? You could say so. Where are you? At the hospital. That bastard aimed at me too. Blomkvist sat speechless for several seconds before he fully took in what his sister had said. What the hell, you were there? Yes. It was the most horrendous thing I've ever experienced. Are you hurt? No. But he tried to get into Lisbeth's room. I blockaded the door and locked us in the bathroom. Blomkvist's whole world suddenly felt off balance. His sister had almost. How is she? He said. She's not hurt. Or, I mean, she wasn't hurt in today's drama at least. He let that sink in. Annika, do you know anything at all about the murderer? Not a thing. He was an older man, neatly dressed. I thought he looked rather bewildered. I've never seen him before, but I came up in the elevator with him a few minutes before it all happened. And Zalachenko is dead, no question? Yes. I heard 3 shots, and according to what I've overheard, he was shot in the head all 3 times. But it's been utter chaos here, with 1,000 policemen, and they're evacuating a ward for acutely ill and injured patients who really ought not to be moved. When the police arrived, one of them tried to question Lisbeth before they even bothered to ask what shape she's in. I had to read them the riot act. Inspector Erlander saw Janini through the doorway to Salander's room. The lawyer had her mobile pressed to her ear, so he waited for her to finish her call. 2 hours after the murder, there was still chaos in the corridor. Zalachenko's room was sealed off. Doctors had tried resuscitation immediately after the shooting, but they soon gave up. He was beyond all help. His body was sent to the pathologist, and the crime scene investigation proceeded as best it could under the circumstances. Erlander's mobile chimed. It was Frederick Malmberg from the investigative team. We've got a positive ID on the murderer, Malmberg said. His name is Evert Gullberg, and he's 78 years old. 78. Quite elderly for a murderer. And who the hell is Evert Gullberg? Retired. Lives in Lehome. Apparently he was a tax lawyer. I got a call from someone at SIS, who told me that they had recently initiated a preliminary investigation against him. When and why? I don't know when. But apparently he had a habit of sending crazy and threatening letters to people in government. Such as who? The Minister of Justice, for one. Erlander sighed. So, a madman. A fanatic. This morning Sapo got calls from several newspapers that had received letters from Gullberg. The Ministry of Justice also called, because Gullberg had made specific death threats against Karl Axel Boden. I want copies of the letters. From Sapo? Yes, damn it. Drive up to Stockholm and pick them up in person if necessary. I want them on my desk when I get back to HQ. Which will be in about an hour. He thought for a second and then asked one more question. Was it Sapo that called you? That's what I told you. I mean, they called you, not vice versa? Exactly. Erlander closed his mobile. He wondered what had gotten into Sapo to make them, out of the blue, feel the need to get in touch with the police, of their own accord. Ordinarily you couldn't get a word out of them. Wadensju flung open the door to the room at the section where Clinton was resting. Clinton sat up cautiously. Just what the hell is going on? Wadensju shrieked. Gullberg has murdered Zalachenko and then shot himself in the head. I know, Clinton said. You know? Wadensju yelled. He was bright red in the face and looked as if he was about to have a stroke. He shot himself, for Christ's sake. He tried to commit suicide. Is he out of his mind? You mean he's alive? For the time being, yes, but he has massive brain damage. Clinton sighed. Such a shame, he said with real sorrow in his voice. Shame? Wadensju burst out. Gullberg is out of his mind. Don't you understand what? Clinton cut him off. Gullberg has cancer of the stomach, colon, and bladder. He's been dying for several months, and in the best case he had only a few months left. Cancer? He's been carrying that gun around for the past 6 months, determined to use it as soon as the pain became unbearable and before the disease turned him into a vegetable. But he was able to do one last favor for the section. He went out in grand style. Wadensju was almost beside himself. You knew? You knew that he was thinking of killing Zalachenko? Naturally. His assignment was to make sure that Zalachenko never got a chance to talk. And as you know, you couldn't threaten or reason with that man. But don't you understand what a scandal this could turn into? Are you just as nuts as Goldberg? Clinton got to his feet laboriously. He looked Wadensju in the eye and handed him a stack of faxes. It was an operational decision. I mourn for my friend, but I'll probably be following him pretty soon. As far as a scandal goes, a retired tax lawyer wrote paranoid letters to newspapers, the police, and the Ministry of Justice. Here's a sample of them. Goldberg blames Zalachenko for everything from the Palm assassination to trying to poison the Swedish people with chlorine. The letters are plainly the work of a lunatic and were illegible in places, with capital letters, underlining, and exclamation marks. I especially like the way he wrote in the margin. Wadensju read the letters with rising astonishment. He put a hand to his brow. Clinton said, "Whatever happens, Zalachenko's death will have nothing to do with the section. It was just some demented retiree who fired the shots." He paused. "The important thing is that starting from now, you have to get with the program. And don't rock the boat." He fixed his gaze on Wadensju. There was steel in the sick man's eyes. "What you have to understand is that the section functions as the spearhead for the total defense of the nation. We're Sweden's last line of defense. Our job is to watch over the security of our country. Everything else is unimportant." Wadensju regarded Clinton with doubt in his eyes. "We're the ones who don't exist," Clinton went on. "We're the ones nobody will ever thank. We're the ones who have to make the decisions that nobody else wants to make. Least of all the politicians." His voice quivered with contempt as he spoke those last words. "Do as I say and the section might survive. For that to happen, we have to be decisive and resort to tough measures." Wadensju felt panic rise in his chest. Cortez wrote feverishly, trying to get down every word that was said from the podium at the police press office at Kingsholmen. Prosecutor Ekström had begun. He explained that it had been decided that the investigation into the police killing in Gosseberga, for which Ronald Niederman was being sought, would be placed under the jurisdiction of a prosecutor in Göteborg. The rest of the investigation concerning Niederman would be handled by Ekström himself. Niederman was a suspect in the murders of Dag Svensson and Mia Johansson. No mention was made of Advocat Bjurman. Ekström also had to investigate and bring charges against Lisbeth Salander, who was under suspicion for a long list of crimes. He explained that he had decided to go public with the information in light of the events that had occurred in Göteborg that day, including the fact that Salander's father, Carl Axel Boden, had been shot dead. The immediate reason for calling the press conference was that he wanted to deny the rumors already being circulated in the media. He had himself received a number of calls concerning these rumors. "Based on current information, I am able to tell you that Carl Axel Boden's daughter, who is being held for the aggravated assault and attempted murder of her father, had nothing to do with this morning's events." "Then who was the murderer?" a reporter from Dagens Echo shouted. "The man who at 1:15 today fired the fatal shots at Carl Axel Boden before attempting to commit suicide has now been identified. He is a 78-year-old man who has been undergoing treatment for a terminal illness and the psychiatric problems associated with it." "Does he have any connection to Lisbeth Salander?" "No. The man is a tragic figure who evidently acted alone, in accordance with his own paranoid delusions. The security police recently initiated an investigation of this man because he had written a number of confused letters to well-known politicians and the media. As recently as this morning, newspaper and government offices received letters in which he threatened to kill Carl Axel Boden. Why didn't the police give Boden protection? The letters naming Boden were sent only last night, and thus arrived at the same time as the murder was being committed. There was no time to act. What's the killer's name? We will not give out that information until his next of kin have been notified. What sort of background does he have? As far as I understand, he previously worked as an accountant and tax lawyer. He has been retired for 15 years. The investigation is still underway, but as you can appreciate from the letters he sent, it is a tragedy that could have been prevented if there had been more support within society. Did he threaten anyone else? I have been advised that he did, yes, but I do not have any details to pass on to you. What will this mean for the case against Salander? For the moment, nothing. We have Carl Axel Boden's own testimony from the officers who interviewed him, and we have extensive forensic evidence against her. What about the reports that Boden tried to murder his daughter? That is under investigation, but there are strong indications that he did indeed attempt to kill her. As far as we can determine at the moment, it was a case of deep antagonism in a tragically dysfunctional family. Cortez scratched his ear. He noticed that the other reporters were taking notes as feverishly as he was. Gunnar Bjork felt an almost unquenchable panic when he heard the news about the shooting at Sahlgrenska Hospital. He had terrible pain in his back. It took him an hour to make up his mind. Then he picked up the phone and tried to call his old protector in Lahome. There was no answer. He listened to the news and heard a summary of what had been said at the press conference. Zalachenko had been shot by a 78-year-old tax specialist. Good Lord. 78 years old. He tried again to call Gullberg, but again in vain. Finally his uneasiness took the upper hand. He could not stay in the borrowed summer cabin in Smadalero. He felt vulnerable and exposed. He needed time and space to think. He packed clothes, painkillers, and toiletries. He did not want to use his own phone, so he limped to the phone booth at the grocer's to call Lansort and book himself a room in the old lighthouse. Lansort was the end of the world, and few people would look for him there. He booked the room for 2 weeks. He glanced at his watch. He would have to hurry to make the last ferry. He went back to the cabin as fast as his aching back would permit. He made straight for the kitchen and checked that the coffee machine was turned off. Then he went to the hall to get his bag. He happened to look into the living room and stopped short in surprise. At first he could not grasp what he was seeing. In some mysterious way the ceiling lamp had been taken down and placed on the coffee table. In its place hung a rope from a hook, right above a stool that was usually in the kitchen. Bjork looked at the noose, failing to understand. Then he heard movement behind him and felt his knees buckle. Slowly he turned to look. 2 men stood there. They were Eastern European, by the look of them. He had no will to react when calmly they took him in a firm grip under both arms, lifted him off the ground, and carried him to the stool. When he tried to resist, pain shot like a knife through his back. He was almost paralyzed as he felt himself being lifted onto the stool. Sandberg was accompanied by a man who went by the nickname of Falun and who in his youth had been a professional burglar. He had, in time, retrained as a locksmith. Hans von Rottinger had first hired Falun for the section in 1986 for an operation that involved forcing entry into the home of the leader of an anarchist group. After that, Falun had been hired from time to time until the mid-90s, when there was less demand for this type of operation. Early that morning Clinton had revived the contact and given Falun an assignment. Falun would make 10,000 kroner tax-free for a job that would take about 10 minutes. In return he had pledged not to steal anything from the apartment that was the target of the operation. The section was not a criminal enterprise, after all. Falun did not know exactly what interests Clinton represented, but he assumed it had something to do with the military. He had read Jan Gillu's books, and he did not ask any questions. But it felt good to be back in the saddle again after so many years of silence from his former employer. His job was to open the door. He was expert at breaking and entering. Even so, it still took 5 minutes to force the lock to Blomqvist's apartment. Then Falun waited on the landing as Sandberg went in. "I'm in," Sandberg said into a hands-free mobile. "Good," Clinton said into his earpiece. Take your time. Tell me what you see. I'm in the hall with a wardrobe and a hat rack on my right. Bathroom on the left. Otherwise there's one very large room, about 500 square feet. There's a small kitchen alcove at the far end on the right. Is there a desk? He seems to work at the kitchen table or sitting on the living room sofa. Wait. Clinton waited. Yes. Here we are. A folder on the kitchen table. And Bjork's report is in it. It looks like the original. Very good. Anything else of interest on the table? Books. P. G. Vinge's memoirs. Power Struggle for Sappho by Eric Magnuson. 4 or 5 more of the same. Is there a computer? No. A safe? No, not that I can see. Take your time. Go through the apartment inch by inch. Martinson reports that Blomqvist is still at the office. You're wearing gloves, right? Of course. Erlander had a chat with Giannini in a brief interlude between one or the other or both of them talking on their mobiles. He went into Salander's room and held out his hand to introduce himself. Then he said hello to Salander and asked her how she was feeling. Salander looked at him, expressionless. He turned to Giannini. I need to ask some questions. All right. Can you tell me what happened this morning? Giannini related what she had seen and heard and how she had reacted up until the moment she had barricaded herself with Salander in the bathroom. Erlander glanced at Salander and then back to her lawyer. So you're sure that he came to the door of this room? I heard him trying to push down the door handle. And you're perfectly sure about that? It's not difficult to imagine things when you're scared or excited. I definitely heard him at the door. He had seen me and pointed his pistol at me. He knew that this was the room I was in. Do you have any reason to believe that he had planned, beforehand that is, to shoot you too? I have no way of knowing. When he took aim at me I pulled my head back in and blockaded the door. Which was the sensible thing to do. And it was even more sensible of you to carry your client to the bathroom. These doors are so thin that the bullets would have gone clean through them if he had fired. What I'm trying to figure out is whether he wanted to attack you personally or whether he was just reacting to the fact that you were looking at him. You were the person nearest to him in the corridor. Apart from the 2 nurses. Did you get the sense that he knew you, or perhaps recognized you? No, not really. Could he have recognized you from the papers? You've had a lot of publicity over several widely reported cases. It's possible. I can't say. And you'd never seen him before? I'd seen him in the elevator. That's the first time I set eyes on him. I didn't know that. Did you talk? No. I got in at the same time he did. I was vaguely aware of him for just a few seconds. He had flowers in one hand and a briefcase in the other. Did you make eye contact? No. He was looking straight ahead. Who got in first? We got in more or less at the same time. Did he look confused or? I couldn't say one way or the other. He got into the elevator and stood perfectly still, holding the flowers. What happened then? We got out of the elevator on the same floor, and I went to visit my client. Did you come straight here? Yes, no. That is, I went to the reception desk and showed my ID. The prosecutor has forbidden my client to have visitors. Where was this man then? Giannini hesitated. I'm not quite sure. He was behind me, I think. No, wait. He got out of the elevator first, but stopped and held the door for me. I couldn't swear to it, but I think he went to the reception desk too. I was just quicker on my feet than he was. But the nurses would know. Elderly, polite, and a murderer, Erlander thought. Yes, he did go to the reception desk, he confirmed. He did talk to the nurse, and he left the flowers at the desk, on her instructions. But you didn't see that? No. I have no recollection of any of that. Erlander had no more questions. Frustration was gnawing at him. He had had the feeling before and had trained himself to interpret it as an alarm triggered by instinct. Something was eluding him, something that was not right. The murderer had been identified as Evert Gullberg, a former accountant and sometime business consultant and tax lawyer. A man in advanced old age. A man against whom Sapo had lately initiated a preliminary investigation because he was a nutcase who wrote threatening letters to public figures. Erlander knew from long experience that there were plenty of nutcases out there, some pathologically obsessed ones who stalked celebrities and looked for love by hiding in woods near their villas. When their love was not reciprocated, it could quickly turn to violent hatred. There were stalkers who traveled from Germany or Italy to follow a 21-year-old lead singer in a pop band from gig to gig, and who then got upset because she would not drop everything to start a relationship with them. There were violent individuals who harped on and on about real or imaginary injustices and who sometimes turned to threatening behavior. There were psychopaths and conspiracy theorists, nutcases who had the gift to read messages hidden from the normal world. There were plenty of examples of these fools taking the leap from fantasy to action. Was not the assassination of Anna Lind the result of precisely such a crazy impulse? But Inspector Erlander did not like the idea that a mentally ill accountant, or whatever he was, could wander into a hospital with a bunch of flowers in one hand and a pistol in the other. Or that he could, for God's sake, execute someone who was the object of a police investigation, his investigation. A man whose name in the public registry was Karl Axel Bodin but whose real name, according to Blomkvist, was Zalachenko. A fucking defected Soviet-Russian agent and professional gangster. At the very least, Zalachenko was a witness, but in the worst case he was involved up to his neck in a series of murders. Erlander had been allowed to conduct 2 brief interviews with Zalachenko, and at no time during either had he been swayed by the man's protestations of innocence. His murderer had shown interest also in Salander, or at least in her lawyer. He had tried to get into her room. And then he had attempted suicide. According to the doctors, he had probably succeeded, even if his body had not yet absorbed the message that it was time to shut down. It was highly unlikely that Evert Gullberg would ever be brought before a court. Erlander did not like the situation, not for a moment. But he had no proof that Gullberg's shots had been anything other than what they seemed. So he had decided to play it safe. He looked at Giannini. I've decided that Salander should be moved to a different room. There's a room in the connecting corridor to the right of the reception area that would be better from a security point of view. It's in direct line of sight of the reception desk and the nurse's station. No visitors will be permitted other than you. No one can go into her room without permission except for doctors or nurses who work here at Solgrenska. And I'll see to it that a guard is stationed outside her door around the clock. Do you think she's in danger? I know of nothing to indicate that she is. But I want to play it safe. Salander listened attentively to the conversation between her lawyer and her adversary, a member of the police. She was impressed that Giannini had replied so precisely and lucidly, and in such detail. She was even more impressed by her lawyer's grace under pressure. Otherwise she had had a monstrous headache ever since Giannini had dragged her out of bed and carried her into the bathroom. Instinctively she wanted as little as possible to do with the hospital staff. She did not like asking for help or showing any sign of weakness. But the headaches were so overpowering that she could not think straight. She reached out and rang for a nurse. Giannini had planned her visit to Gobog as a brisk, necessary prologue to long-term work. She wanted to get to know Salander, question her about her actual condition, and present a draft outline of the strategy that she and Blomkvist had cobbled together to deal with the legal proceedings. She had originally intended to return to Stockholm that evening, but because of the dramatic events at Solgrenska, she still had not had a real conversation with Salander. Her client was in much worse shape than she had been led to believe. She was suffering from acute headaches and a high fever, which prompted a doctor by the name of Endron to prescribe a strong painkiller, an antibiotic, and rest. Consequently, as soon as her client had been moved to a new room and a security guard had been posted outside, Giannini was asked, quite firmly, to leave. It was already 4:30 p. m. She hesitated. She could go back to Stockholm knowing that she might have to take the train to Göteborg again as soon as the following day. Or she could stay overnight. But her client might be too ill to deal with a visit tomorrow as well. She had not booked a hotel room. As a lawyer who mainly represented abused women without any great financial resources, she tried to avoid padding her bill with expensive hotel charges. She called home first and then rang Lillian Josephson, a lawyer colleague who was a member of the Women's Network and an old friend from law school. "I'm in Göteborg," she said. "I was thinking of going home tonight, but certain things happened today that require me to stay overnight. Is it okay if I sleep at your place?" "Oh, please do. That would be fun. We haven't seen each other in ages." "I'm not interrupting anything?" "No, of course not. But I've moved. I'm now on a side street off Linnegatan. But I do have a guest room. And we can go out to a bar later if we feel like it." "If I have the energy," Giannini said. "What time is good?" They agreed that Giannini should turn up at around 6 o'clock. Giannini took the bus to Linnegatan and spent the next hour in a Greek restaurant. She was famished, and ordered a shish kebab with salad. She sat for a long time thinking about the day's events. She was a little shaky now that the adrenaline had worn off, but she was pleased with herself. In a time of great danger she had been cool, calm, and collected. She had instinctively made the right decisions. It was a pleasant feeling to know that her reactions were up to an emergency. After a while she took her filofax from her briefcase and opened it to the notes section. She read through it carefully. She was filled with doubt about the plan that her brother had outlined to her. It had sounded logical at the time, but it didn't look so good now. Even so, she did not intend to back out. At 6 o'clock she paid her bill and walked to Lillian's place on Olivdalsgatan. She punched in the door code her friend had given her. She stepped into the stairwell and was looking for a light switch when the attack came out of the blue. She was slammed up against a tiled wall next to the door. She banged her head hard, felt a rush of pain, and fell to the ground. The next moment she heard footsteps moving swiftly away and then the front door opening and closing. She struggled to her feet and put her hand to her forehead. There was blood on her palm. What the hell? She went out onto the street and just caught a glimpse of someone turning the corner towards Sveaplan. In shock, she stood still for about a minute. Then she walked back to the door and punched in the code again. Suddenly she realized that her briefcase was gone. She had been robbed. It took a few seconds before the horror of it sank in. Oh no. The Zalachenko folder. She felt the alarm spreading up from her diaphragm. Slowly she sat down on the staircase. Then she jumped up and dug into her jacket pocket. The filofax. Thank God. Leaving the restaurant, she had stuffed it into her pocket instead of putting it back in her briefcase. It contained the draft of her strategy in the Salander case, point by detailed point. Then she stumbled up the stairs to the 5th floor and pounded on her friend's door. Half an hour had passed before she had recovered enough to call her brother. She had a black eye and a gash above her eyebrow that was still bleeding. Lillian had cleaned it with alcohol and put a bandage on it. No, she did not want to go to the hospital. Yes, she would like a cup of tea. Only then did she begin to think rationally again. The first thing she did was call Blomqvist. He was still at Millennium, where he was searching for information about Zalachenko's murderer with Cortez and Eriksson. He listened with increasing dismay to Giannini's account of what had happened. "No bones broken?" he said. "Black eye. I'll be okay after I've had a chance to calm down." "Did you disturb a robbery, was that it?" "Michael, my briefcase was stolen, with the Zalachenko report you gave me." "Not a problem. I can make another copy." He broke off as he felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. First Zalachenko. Now Annika. He closed his iBook, stuffed it into his shoulder bag, and left the office without a word, moving fast. He jogged home to Bellmansgaten and up the stairs. The door was locked. As soon as he entered the apartment, he saw that the folder he had left on the kitchen table was gone. He did not even bother to look for it. He knew exactly where it had been. He sank onto a chair at the kitchen table as thoughts whirled through his head. Someone had been in his apartment. Someone who was trying to cover Zalachenko's tracks. His own copy and his sister's copy were gone. Bublansky still had the report. Or did he? Blomkvist got up and went to the phone, but stopped with his hand on the receiver. Someone had been in his apartment. He looked at his phone with the utmost suspicion and took out his mobile. But how easy is it to eavesdrop on a mobile conversation? He slowly put the mobile down next to his landline and looked around. I'm dealing with pros here, obviously. People who could bug an apartment as easily as get into one without breaking a lock. He sat down again. He looked at his laptop case. How hard is it to hack into my email? Salander can do it in 5 minutes. He thought for a long time before he went back to the landline and called his sister. He chose his words with care. How are you doing? I'm fine, Mick. Tell me what happened from the moment you arrived at Solgrenska until you were attacked. It took 10 minutes for Janini to give him her account. Blomkvist did not say anything about the implications of what she told him, but asked questions until he was satisfied. He sounded like an anxious brother, but his mind was working on a completely different level as he reconstructed the key points. She had decided to stay in Gobug at 4:30 that afternoon. She called her friend on her mobile, gotten the address and door code. The robber was waiting for her inside the stairwell at 6 o'clock on the dot. Her mobile was being monitored. It was the only possible explanation. Which meant that his was being monitored too. Foolish to think otherwise. And the Zalachenko report is gone, Janini repeated. Blomkvist hesitated. Whoever had stolen the report already knew that his copy too had been stolen. It would only be natural to mention that. Mine too, he said. What? He explained that he had come home to find that the blue folder on his kitchen table was gone. It's a disaster, he said in a gloomy voice. That was the crucial part of the evidence. Mick, I'm so sorry. Me too, Blomkvist said. Damn it. But it's not your fault. I should have published the report the day I got it. What do we do now? I have no idea. This is the worst thing that could have happened. It will turn our whole plan upside down. We don't have a shred of evidence left against Björk or Teleborian. They talked for another 2 minutes before Blomkvist ended the conversation. I want you to come back to Stockholm tomorrow, he said. I have to see Salander. Go and see her in the morning. We have to sit down and think about where we go from here. When Blomkvist hung up, he sat on the sofa staring into space. Whoever was listening to their conversation knew now that Millennium had lost Björk's report, along with the correspondence between Björk and Dr. Teleborian. They could be satisfied that Blomkvist and Janini were distraught. If nothing else, Blomkvist had learned from the preceding night's study of the history of the security police that disinformation was the basis of all espionage activity. And he had just planted disinformation that in the long run might prove invaluable. He opened his laptop case and took out the copy of the Zalachenko report he'd made for Armansky, which he had not yet managed to deliver. It was the only remaining copy, and he did not intend to waste it. On the contrary, he would make 5 more copies and put them in safe places. Then he called Eriksson. She was about to lock up for the day. Where did you disappear to in such a hurry? She said. Could you stay there a few minutes, please? There's something I have to discuss with you before you leave. He had not had time to do his laundry for several weeks. All his shirts were in the hamper. He packed a razor and power struggle for Sapo along with the last remaining copy of Björk's report. He went to Dressman and bought 4 shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, and some underwear and took the clothes with him to the office. Eriksson waited while he took a quick shower, wondering what was going on. Someone broke into my apartment and stole the Zalachenko report. Someone mugged Annika in Gobog and stole her copy. I have proof that her phone is tapped, which may well mean that mine is too. Maybe yours at home, and all the Millennium phones have been bugged. And if someone took the trouble to break into my apartment, they'd be pretty dumb if they didn't bug it as well. I see, said Erickson in a flat voice. She glanced at the mobile on the desk in front of her. Keep working as usual. Use the mobile, but don't give away any information. Tomorrow, tell Henry. He went home an hour ago. He left a stack of public reports on your desk. But what are you doing here? I plan to sleep here tonight. If they shot Zalachenko, stole the reports, and bugged my apartment today, there's a good chance they've just gotten started and haven't done the office yet. People have been here all day. I don't want the office to be empty tonight. You think that the murder of Zalachenko? But the murderer was a geriatric psycho. Malin, I don't believe in coincidence. Somebody is covering Zalachenko's tracks. I don't care who people think that old lunatic was or how many crazy letters he wrote to government ministers. He was a hired killer of some sort. He went there to kill Zalachenko, and maybe Lisbeth too. But he committed suicide, or tried to. What hired killer would do that? Blomkvist thought for a moment. He met the editor-in-chief's gaze. Maybe someone who's 78 and doesn't have much to lose. He's mixed up in all this, and when we finish digging we'll prove it. Erickson studied Blomkvist's face. She had never before seen him so composed and unflinching. She shuddered. Blomkvist noticed her reaction. One more thing. We're no longer in a battle with a gang of criminals. This time it's with a government department. It's going to be tough. Erickson nodded. I didn't imagine things would go this far. Malin, what happened today makes very plain how dangerous this could get. If you want out, just say the word. She wondered what Berger would have said. Then stubbornly she shook her head.
And that marks the end of the current chapter. Thank you for listening to The Book Reader. Stay tuned for the next episode tomorrow. Please subscribe for updates.